Quite a lot to unpack now in this 24th day of the war here in Israel, but I want to bring in my guest in studio to talk about it all. I'm joined by Benjamin Anthony, CEO of the Miriam Institute. Benjamin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start with putting our focus on the West Bank right now.
Yeah.
When we speak about this war that's happening, we're mainly focused on the two fronts, whether that being the South and the North, but it's important to notice that there's still quite a lot of activity happening in the West Bank as well. In fact, since October 7th, since this war began, the idea of conducting nightly arrest raids, arresting more than 1,000 terrorists, about 700 of them affiliated with Hamas.
Yeah, a couple of points about our operations inside Judea and Samaria or the West Bank. First of all, the absolute need to continue to eliminate growing Hamas cells over in that area. This is an ongoing project that's lasted for several years. A lot of the people, Nicole, who observe what's taking place in Israel right now say repeatedly that Hamas holds the civilians of the Gaza Strip beneath its jackboot, and therefore those civilians have no agency, never supported Hamas, are not responsible for the acts of Hamas. Not correct. This is simply not true. Some are and some are not. I remind everybody that Hamas came to power by way of a democratic election, and they are representatives of a plurality of the people there inside the Gaza Strip. Now, what's confirms that is the fact that the popularity of Hamas is growing and has been growing in Judea and Samaria and in the West Bank, despite the fact that Hamas does not rule that area. That's very, very telling. So you're seeing the need to counter these terror cells over there. This is in an ongoing fashion, as I mentioned, but you're also seeing the cunning of the Israel Defense Forces in a positive way. That aspect of misdirection. The eyes of the world are fixed upon the Gaza Strip and what we're doing there. That is a perfect opportunity to go and do that which we need to do beneath a less intensive gaze over there in the West Bank, and I applaud our security forces for doing so.
Well, it's interesting also because what we've seen happening and what we saw happen on October 7th, people didn't realize this was happening right under our noses. The threat of Hamas then destroying, massacring those kibbutz communities in the South. Yet in the West Bank, it's an even more difficult situation as we have many Israeli settlements living side by side with these Palestinians, which has become a source of tension between many Israeli settlers and Palestinians. We've seen many, many clashes, and I want to note that unlike these southern communities, which many of them were not armed, many of the Israeli settlers in the West Bank are armed, and so that poses an extra threat.
It does pose an extra threat. I think that it's inevitable that tensions will rise under the current circumstances, and I think what's important to note is it doesn't serve anybody's purposes. It does not serve the benefit of what the Israel Defense Forces and our security forces are trying to undertake right now. If there is vigilantism, I'm not saying that there is or there isn't, but if we see an uptick in vigilantism among the Jewish residents and citizens of our communities over there in Judea and Samaria, I don't think that's going to assist in lowering the flames and the tensions that we're facing here in the States of Israel. I will say also one of the areas that we were expecting to explode and has not yet done so, and we're very hopeful that it won't, is here in the home front within Israel proper, if I can term it like that, within the Arab-Israeli sector, and attitudes towards them and attitudes from them. That's actually been on quite a low flame, and that's encouraging and positive to see.
I want to talk a little bit more about that because, yes, we speak about a lot about the tensions between what we're seeing between the residents, the Palestinian residents, Israelis, but tensions also we can see, just take it back to a few decades ago, just the tensions between Israelis, Arab Israelis, Jewish Arab Israelis, but we're not seeing that so far when it comes to this war.
We're not seeing that so far, and I think there are a couple of reasons for it. First and foremost, Hamas's atrocities, that which they dealt against the Israeli civilians and our population and our elderly, our infirm, our men, women and children. Those are activities that are depraved and beyond the ken of most people to understand. Nobody of right mind can possibly sympathize with a terrorist organization that would stoop to such atrocities. And that is a phenomenon that can be overlaid onto Israeli society as a whole. With that having been said, you've also got the Israeli security forces resolved to watching all of our various fronts simultaneously. So certainly the Gaza Strip, certainly our border with Lebanon, with Syria as well, as you mentioned during your opening, but also Judea and Samaria, and of course in the home front. The Israeli National Police and the Shin Bet are working very, very closely indeed to make sure that any rise in tensions is quickly dampened. And I think that those two elements, seeing the atrocities wrought by by Hamas, coupled with an absolute readiness by our security forces, I think those have combined to bring about relative quiet. It's not silent, but it's relative quiet, and it's not the uptick that we anticipated based on what we saw during our recent operations last year.
I do want to bring up just one incident that we did have today. As I mentioned earlier, there was a stabbing attack in Jerusalem. Someone stabbed a police officer. We're still getting information exactly about the suspect, but this does turn to signs that there could be more suspected terror attacks within Israel itself.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to raise that, and that goes hand in hand with what I was saying. So we've seen this isolated incident, this stabbing of a police officer inside Jerusalem. That's a consequence of the successful campaign of Hamas to incite violence here on the home front and in the home front. But look how limited it is right now. I believe it's because Hamas does not enjoy popular support from among the vast majority here, for the simple fact that what it undertook is beyond any human justification.
Meanwhile, as we're focusing on everything that is happening within Israel, I think it's important to focus also where the main war is happening right now, in southern Israel, near the Gaza border. That's where